delighted to say that I'm joined now by former Conservative leader Sir Iain Duncan Smith, the MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. Lovely to see you this morning. Now, the newspapers bring us news of Tory calamity, Sir Iain, with the Tories apparently heading for the biggest defeat in history. Talk of Labour winning 250 seats, majority. It looks like it could be worse than 1997. What's your response to some of these reports?
Well, let me deal with the Labour bit first and I'll come back to the other stuff. I actually don't agree. The truth is, if you look at the polls as well, they tell you nearly half the public have simply not made an absolute decision about where they'll vote. Now, that's really important because the comparisons with 96 are wrong. I was here in 96 by way past longer than this moment in political cycle. I would knock on doors of Tory voters and they would tell me, no good, sorry, I want change, I'm voting for Blair. They didn't say the Labour Party, they said Blair. He had cut through completely the decisions that had been made. At this stage, they haven't. So I always refer to this as the polling being a mile wide, but about an inch deep. The truth is, it's a reaction to us. It's not that they want Labour, it's they're fed up with us, the infighting and all the other problems. We've had COVID and the cost of living crisis. Any government that had faced the biggest challenge is bound to look like being unpopular because people are fed up with having cost of living, etc. And that's true. Sorting that out is absolutely vital. And then at the same time, nobody quite knows who Labour are. So you need to have a few battles with Labour, defining them and defining yourselves.
I know,
and we
but
seem to be dodging that.
seems to be, reluctant to take the fight to Labour. I mean, there's lots of key battlegrounds. You could talk about the private school VAT decision. You could talk about the Green Prosperity Pledge. But the attack lines are there, but they don't seem to attack for long enough and sort of directly enough at the stuff that Labour's coming up with and indeed the stuff that Labour's flip-flopping about. I mean, do you think Rishi Sunak's running scared of Labour? They come up with a budget that's Labour-light. As Alexander Downer just said to me, what's the point of imitating the opposition?
Well, I agree. So here's what they should do. There are 3 or 4 issues that are very critical to defining us and defining Labour. One of those is net zero. I have to tell you, I know none of my constituents I knock on doors that tell me they love the idea of spending vast sums of money and taxing them to get the money off them. So we saw that in Uxbridge, the ULEZ vote, but also the Uxbridge resistance to Labour there was the first time the 2019 coalition that elected us came back together again over this issue. You see the polls tell them that, yes, everyone wants a clean environment, of course we do, but we are less than 1% now of global emissions. We're one of the lowest of the whole set of G7. What we should be doing is saying, do you know what? The cost of this is so high, probably well over £1 trillion. They don't want it. So when you see polls, they say, yes, keen on that, but not going to pay another penny towards this. And I think we need to say, stop the rush, try and get this sorted so the public can actually agree and believe with where we are. Now, Labour will come to that fight because they're completely wedded to the whole rush to net zero, the 28 billion, which Rishi Sunak goes on about quite rightly, that Labour pledged to spend of taxpayers' money. That had to disappear, but it's only temporary. It'll come back if they get elected. So defining them, migration, we've got the flights to Rwanda. They've got to get that bill finished and through and those off. How
confident are you that you're going to see flights off to Rwanda in this term?
Well, I'm confident, but I'm not absolutely confident.
You don't sound that confident.
Well, there's one bit which is the European Convention of Human Rights, which there's a little window that could possibly do it. They might have made it tougher.
But I think actually I mean, is it going to be enough? I know that there's this theory that if you send flights to Rwanda, finally, if you send people away and you try and bring these boat numbers down, that's going to be the secret to some kind of electoral success for the Tories. They've got to do a lot more than that, haven't they?
But the main point is these things sometimes are quite visual. The flights going off to Rwanda is a sign, finally, that the government has gripped this and is beginning to turn the tide. There are lots of other routes in, as you've seen a lot of, we've had a huge migration here. One of the big pressures on housing is the scale of the number of people coming in. That doesn't help. But that means, therefore, we've got to start getting those on sickness benefit. And when I did it, we had the lowest number of workless households. They've now ballooned since COVID. We've
9 million who could
really got to get that and back to work. Proper training. Kids have disappeared from school as a result of the ridiculous lockdowns. We've got to get this going, and we need to show that we're keen on that.
On migration, no doubt you noticed, as I did, that this figure of 315,000 per year seems to be baked in by the OBR. when it comes to how legal migration should look over the coming years. 315,000 people coming into this country a year is too many people, isn't it?
The most positive thing anybody in politics and government can do is ignore the OBR.
Right.
They've been wrong
should
on...
that figure come down? Why are the government now using these figures?
Of course it should, because we've got so many people here domestically in the UK that should be seeking work, taking that work and learning, a lot of training. That needs to happen. So all of this is where we should be going. This cheap way of bringing people in just because you can't be bothered to train them, because you have to.
Yes.
It's like drivers. I used to have this argument with the big haulage companies. So why are you bringing all these people in from Poland when there are loads of people with driver's license that would need only 2 weeks, I did it, HGV2, to train to be an HGV, then it's a very well-paid career. And they just didn't want to do the training side of it. So, you know, we need to stop looking for cheap short-term alternatives and start recognising the British public are worth investing in to get them back to work and trained.
But people like you are making all of these great points, which I'm sure our audience would wholeheartedly agree with. But the government isn't listening. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? That Rishi Sunak is banging on about this 5-point plan. It's not working. They've come out with a budget that hasn't moved the dial at all. You've got this scandal over this Hester donation. You know, the Tories are now under pressure to give this 10 million back because of his comments about Diane Abbott. I mean, you can sympathise with the view that the Tories should give that £10 million back. I
can, but they probably spent it, so it's going to be quite difficult for them.
What about the £5 million that's hanging in the bank?
I don't understand why we want to give money back to somebody who's been so abusive and used race in an argument. Why would you give that back to him when that rewards him for having been stupid and appalling? So what I would say, if you've got any money to give back, I'd give it to charities and people that help with community cohesion and all the other stuff. That's the way to punish somebody who behaves really badly, not give them money back to him.
And what's your analysis of some of these reports about Penny Mordaunt in this morning's newspapers? I mean, the right is suggesting that they could back Penny Mordaunt. Could you back Penny Mordaunt?
I just look at this whole process and think to myself, we've got to stop turning inwards on ourselves and start trying to get behind the idea that we've got an election to fight. And the public wants to know that we're both united and we're very clear. Those points I said earlier on about how to get the Labour Party into an argument that you can then kill them over in terms of the way that you take the debate is really critical, and dynamic politics demands it. What dynamic politics does not demand is literally the sort of third leader in a short space of time that replaced Boris Johnson. And I was opposed to when we replaced Boris Johnson because he had a man with many faults and had done all sorts of stuff, but nobody had faced the crises he had faced, and he still at that stage would have been an asset at the end of the day in communication.
Is he still an asset?
But Rishi is here, and we have to get behind him, I think, generally. Now, I'd take a lot of persuading. It's not a short-term process. You'd have to have a vote of confidence. Then on the back of the vote of confidence, you have to have a leadership election. The idea, you know, I'd be persuaded that you could get one person in short term. I doubt it. That will take you weeks.
But then we read reports today in the Sunday Times that even Rishi Sunak thinks he might not go the distance and that he might be out by June or July.
Well, the answer is we either decide that we want to get the election won or we just want to give up on it.
Isn't it a damage limitation exercise now, though? I mean, get the election won. Don't you mean not lose it too badly?
No, I mean, the only way you can do politics is to aim to win.
Yes.
Aim to resist, aim to stop, aim to halfway. It doesn't work. You've got to try and win that election. And I think sometimes I have to say to my colleagues, you spend more time discussing how to avoid defeat than you do actually talking about winning. When you're that negative, the public can see it. They think, well, what's the point of these people? All they want to do is surrender. I say to my colleagues, get on the front foot. Get out into your constituencies and start really blasting this nonsense that Labour believes in, of net zero, the trans thing with safe spaces for women. All these things are really important.
Do you think you have a better chance of winning if you bring back Boris to campaign for the Tories?
I would love to see Boris come back and campaign because he's a very good campaigner. It's not to undermine any leadership. It's just he'd be a great campaigner. But is he an electoral
asset in your seat? I mean, you're in a London seat. You know, it's a marginal seat.
Well, more, I think, outside in that sense. We've got to work our own sense. In London, the big issue for us, in my seat, is things like ULEZ, which this present mayor, who I think is one of the weakest spineless mayors we've ever had, introduces this for the money, and nobody wants it in North London because the environment is clean up there. We don't need ULEZ. He pushed it on us. Nobody I've met on the doorstep wants this. They want to get rid of it, and the Conservative Party, the candidate, Susan Hall, is committed to getting rid of it literally as she can on day 1 or 2.
Is she making enough headway, do you think?
Well, it takes a little bit of time, really.
She hasn't got much time left, though.
No, she hasn't. But my main point is, I agree she's got to be more out there, we've got to get behind her, but the reality is the issues are the key thing that will decide the mayoral election. I wouldn't say he's got an awful lot of character, so the reality is it's a campaign between ideas and what you will do. And London's fed up with the extra costs that he's imposed on them, the divisive nature of what he does in central London, and they want a mayor that actually says, let's get the economics of London right, because central London is very damaged post-lockdown, and he's imposed the congestion charge and the ULEZ charge for 7 days a week. People don't go to restaurants anymore and spend their money to the degree they did before in central London. We've literally got a minute left, if that, and just have a very quick chat about Russia and China. Obviously, we've had Grant Shapps seemingly under threat, but I'm wondering, I know you have been hawkish on China. Do you still think the bigger threat is coming from China than Putin? Yeah, I'm sanctioned by China because I raised the genocide of the Uyghur, and they hated that, so they sanctioned me and a few others. I take a view about China, which is China is very wealthy, and it sits at the heart of what I call this new axis of totalitarian states. So China, North Korea, Russia, Iran is very close to China, and all this stuff over Gaza was planned by Iran. Why we haven't prescribed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in London is to me an utter mystery. Two banks shoveling money out to these extremists that exist in the UK. We should stop that straight away. Sir Iain, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.